Hey, Teresa. You know what that sound means?
Hey Kim, does that sound mean episode 6 is a Halloween
Halloween special!
special? Ooh, you did that good. That was eerie.
Right? I know. Yeah, I
Wow.
thought in honor of our Halloween special, we'd have some sound effects. So that's what we're doing.
Well, that's creepy, and that sounds like me. How is that
I
a thing?
know, I know. It sounds like growing up with you and having to listen to you be all moany and groany. Just kidding.
I can't believe you said that actually,
I
because
know. Because, uh-oh, why?
what I was curious about this week, can I just jump in and be curious?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, I want to
because
know.
that is just so funny. So, maybe to tell our listeners about growing up with me, I was a very moody girl.
You were just the typical middle child. No offense to all the middle children out there in the world, but they have been known to be moody.
They have been known to be moody.
Yes.
And I was fascinated with otherworldly things, so I was a cross between Moody Mary and Wednesday Adams, maybe?
Oh, good one.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, what I was curious about when I thought about Halloween and spooky subjects and yet keeping it real and grounded and holistic was my experience, my personal experience when we were growing up in our house where we attended junior high and high school. And Kim, I don't know what your personal experience of the house was. It was very weird for me because it was a brand new house, but I was scared of it. And I always thought, well, maybe it's because I just read too many scary things, but I was usually fine. But then if I was home alone, even as a much older teenager, I'd be really scared and I'd sometimes go and sit outside on the porch until our parents would get home. So I don't know, did you feel anything odd about the house?
Um, no, not really.
So interesting. So my experience was sort of a feeling of heaviness and not being watched, but almost just kind of an apprehension, a watchfulness on my part, and a feeling of something is about to happen. And then one night, something happened.
Yes, I remember this night.
Ah, good. I'm glad. I was hoping you could back me up on this. So
Yes.
one night I was sleeping and my bed was parallel to the wall. I had my little Shih Tzu puppy with me, and it was sort of the middle of the night, and the Shih Tzu all of a sudden started barking and growling, and it woke me up. And she was looking at the wall, which is, parallel to the bed. So I looked up, and this is a thing that happened, at least in my perception, was that my stereo, that was back in the day before iPhones and iPods and MP3 players, so I had a big old stereo, and it was rocking on the shelf slowly, maybe 3 or 4 times back and forth. It took me maybe a millisecond of just like utter stunned, I don't understand what I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's like very freaky.
So freaky, so surreal, but real at the same time. Like I'm sort of doing a checklist. Am I awake? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The dog is watching it, so it's in the perception of something else. And I let out a holy hell scream. I mean, I screamed so loud, and at that exact second of the scream, the stereo flew through the air just several feet, but didn't just fall off the shelf. It flew forward and landed on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know how that might sound to someone if they haven't had an experience, but our dad came running in at the sound of my scream and saw the stereo near my bed, relatively far from the wall shelf it was on. And he said himself, and our dad was so pragmatic, wouldn't you
Yes.
agree?
Yes,
He
definitely.
said that couldn't just fall that way. It couldn't just fall over just like that.
Right. Yeah. It would have been right somewhere closer to the shelf.
Right.
If it had just toppled over or the shelf had given way somehow.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that was my experience. And I've always, initially, I thought there's a poltergeist.
Of course.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah, because poltergeists are ghosts, and this is actually the definition, ghosts that are thought to be mischievous and held responsible for unexplained noises or happenings, things moving, things falling, things breaking.
Or when kids just want to blame something else other than themselves for whatever they broke. Or
when a tempestuous teenager is like, wants a new stereo.
right. Yeah. No,
No,
but you didn't do it.
No, absolutely not. Well,
No.
actually,
Well, did you?
Did I? That's
don't
what I
know.
want to talk about, because
Okay.
poltergeist activity is thought to be the most understood form of paranormal activity, at least when it comes in connection with haunted houses and other paranormal events. The word poltergeist, it means noisy ghost, and it's got that name translated from Germany. And for many years, researchers believed that noisy ghosts, people that had passed on, were causing the phenomena reported in these cases. It was assumed that the things which occurred in a house that was haunted by a poltergeist were caused by an outside force, while some cases of real-life poltergeists have turned out to be both, quote, intelligent spirits and the work of human agents.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, tell me more.
Yes, some cases exist that lead researchers believe that there may actually be a combination of the two.
So how does that work?
Let's take a look at two different types of cases that are referred to as
Okay.
poltergeist. So poltergeist cases are the work of actual intelligent spirits. This is one school of thought. While poltergeist-like cases are the work of human agents. What makes it so hard to define is the fact that some cases are a combination of the two, like we talked about, where human locations carry such a charge of energy that they make it possible for ghosts to exist there and for the unconscious energy of the human agent to manifest. In both kinds of cases, similar phenomena takes place, including knocking, tapping sounds, noises with no visible cause, disturbance of stationary objects like household items, sound
Like
familiar?
stereos?
Furniture moving, doors slamming, lights turning on and off, rocks and dirt throwing. In some cases, these events can be tangible evidence of ghosts, but in other cases, while the activity is paranormal, it has nothing to do with the spirits. So if you leave out what are thought to be cases involving negative and violent spirits, the current and widely accepted theory behind poltergeist phenomena is that the activity is usually caused by a person in the household, and that person is called an agent.
So you're the poltergeist.
Just call me Teresa Agent. Oh, I don't know. Agent
Agent
00666.
Oh, no.
Ooh, that sounded creepier than I intended. I'm a really good person.
I do not want to think I grew up with Agent 666 next to me in my bedroom.
I'm a really good person, I promise.
You really are. You just had a very emotional teenage growing up
And
years.
the emotional, it hits it right on the head, because as we'll find, the emotional angst that most teenagers experience is a very strong catalytic for these kinds of energies. So let's start with, what's a poltergeist agent?
As in, what's a poltergeist agent? Look under the dictionary and see a picture of Teresa.
Yeah. Yes. Recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, RSPK, is a phrase suggested by parapsychologist William Roll to denote poltergeist phenomena and poltergeist activity occurring around a single person called an agent or focus, and that's typically, interestingly, a prepubescent or pubescent female. The person is usually an adolescent girl, normally one who is troubled emotionally. It's believed that this person may be unconsciously manipulating the items in the house by psychokinesis, which is the power to move things by energy generated in the brain. This kinetic energy remains unexplained, but even mainstream scientists are starting to admit that it does seem to exist. Now, it's unknown why this energy seems to appear in females around the age of puberty, but it has been documented to occur. It seems that when the activity begins to manifest, the girl is usually in the midst of some, emotional or sexual turmoil.
Uh-oh.
I know.
I had no idea all this was going on.
So Mom, turn off the podcast. Step
Yeah,
away
right?
from the podcast.
Ooh, are we going to get some dirt right now?
No, but I mean,
Oh, okay.
I just feel like we've already gone too far for my mom.
Okay.
Our
You
mom.
said the SDX word, so it's over.
Yeah, it's too late. So
Yeah,
go ahead
it's too
and
late.
listen,
She might as well
Mom.
keep listening. Yeah, go ahead and listen.
But you must realize that teenage girls are experiencing, like, their hormones are changing and they're experiencing a lot of turmoil, a lot of, different feelings that are brand new for them. And whether there's any kind of activity in that department or not, there's a lot of that energy.
Right.
So it is also possible for young boys and even young adults to be able to manifest this unknowing ability. But it has been found more in adolescent girls.
Well, we're typically more emotional, right? So
Yes.
that would make sense. We express our emotions and we, get caught up in that. And I definitely understand the hormonal aspect.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked before, Kim, about how the brain and the emotions and thoughts, how everything is electrical. So
Right.
it does make sense to me when those processes are changing and moving into a different form as you become a more mature human, that those energies may be more difficult to control, or maybe there's just excess energy.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking, was that there's so much and that the individual can't even process it or deal with it, and it just emits, and energy has to do something with itself.
Right.
So.
That's right. Exactly right.
Oh,
So
wow.
the vast majority of people have no idea that they're causing the activity and are usually surprised that there's even a possibility that they could make the strange things happen. I can attest to this, and I have to tell you how I first found out it could have been me. This is craziness. I thought that there was a poltergeist. I really did. Until several years later, watching an episode of The Waltons.
The Waltons.
The Waltons of all things.
Did they ever cover anything paranormal on the Waltons?
I'm going to have to say, I bet anything that this was during a time when, you know how shows sort of cycle through and first they're vastly popular and then they start, naturally progressing. They're aging a little and losing that popularity.
Yeah.
And they start, tackling new subjects and adopting new children.
Grasping at straws for ratings.
So in this episode, they had poltergeist activity. And it turned out that it was caused by Elizabeth, the younger daughter, as she was entering into her teenage years and the conflict that she had to do with that. So, yeah, it was the Waltons that educated me.
Hey, you never know what you're going to learn and what you're going to learn it from.
See, I mean, the universe provides.
Right? Exactly. Even through the Waltons.
So I'm not going to say that I was surprised to find that there was a possibility I could make that happen. I was relieved because it's much more comforting to me to think that I could have excess energy that could affect matter in some way at some point in my life than to think that there was a true life poltergeist in my room that night.
Yeah, of course. Who wants to think of some, I wanted to say the word benevolent, but that's good, not bad.
Don't want to think about benevolence.
No, I don't want to think of a benevolent being of some kind of creature, spirit, an evil spirit that's, throwing things around in my room. I'd much rather think it was just me.
Right, exactly right. And it marries better with my sort of world view or my spiritual view that everything is energy and we're energy. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said, we'll talk about a couple of different poltergeist activities, and one famous one was the Borley Rectory.
Oh, I've never heard of this.
Yes, the Borley Rectory is one of the world's most famous haunted house cases, and it's actually a case where a haunted location assisted a human agent in creating her own activity. The theory of this article, and by the way, we'll have links in our show notes to all of the works that I've referenced here, but the theory of the article writer was that this was a literally haunted location. It was the site of phenomena such as, or I should say reported phenomena, of phantom footsteps, strange lights, ghostly whispers, a headless man, a girl in white, all the classics, an apparition of the home's builder, spirit of a nun walked the garden.
It was a whole smorgasbord of spookiness.
They took the spookiness book and just kind of made a checklist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just a little too much. I mean, I can see one or two, but like, they got everything in there.
We've got it all. This is your one-stop haunted house.
Right? Yes, exactly. Okay, sorry, continue.
That's okay. Local legend had it that a monastery had once been located on the site, and that a 13th century monk and a beautiful young novice were killed while trying to elope from the place.
Oh.
I know. The monk was hanged, and his would-be bride was bricked up alive.
Oh my God.
In the walls of her convent.
That's horrendous.
So this building has this whole back history of all of these ghostly events and, troubled history. But it was still relatively peaceful until in 1930 when the Reverend Lionel Foister and his wife Mary Ann moved into the house. I feel like you have this building that for whatever reason has energy, and it could even be the energy generated by myths and legends attached to the property.
Sure.
But into this moves a woman who may have a little troubled energy about herself. So their time in the residence would see a marked increase in the paranormal activity. People were locked out of rooms, household items vanished, windows were broken, furniture moved, odd sounds were heard, stereos went flying off the walls. Oh no, wait, sorry, that was another story.
Maybe one of those with the phonograph? Isn't that what they had back then? Maybe the phonograph went flying across the room.
Flying across the room.
Yes.
However, the worst of the incidents seemed to involve Mrs. Foister, as she was thrown from her bed at night, slapped by invisible hands, forced to dodge heavy objects, and almost suffocated with a mattress.
Oh my gosh, Mrs. Foister!
Mrs. Foister! Soon
Lord
after,
have mercy.
there began to appear a series of scrawled messages on the walls of the house, written by an unknown hand. They seemed to be pleading with Mrs. Foister, using phrases like, "Mary Ann, please get help."
Ew. Okay, I'm outie. As soon as the messages are on the wall,
Yeah.
forget that. I am in a hotel. I'm out the door.
And yet, they stay.
Of course.
So Borley Rectory was believed to be a catalyst for paranormal activity. Something about the location itself that seemed to invite energy in, and also to act as a storage battery. I think that's critical.
Yeah.
A storage battery that Marianne Foister could somehow tap into.
It does seem like, it almost seems like a perfect storm. Like there might already be that poltergeist activity, or there's that entity or some kind of energy there, but then it takes that particular person too. It's like the combination of the two, and then it just all heck breaks loose.
Right. There was another haunting in San Pedro called the Jackie Hernandez case that was investigated by Barry Taff, who also investigated the famous entity case.
Ooh.
Yeah. So Taff got involved in the case along with a cameraman in 1989 when he was asked to look into a house in San Pedro, California that was allegedly being haunted. The owner of the house was Jackie Hernandez, a young woman with a number of emotional problems. The investigators were told of strange smells, unexplained sounds, moving objects, apparitions, a glowing cloud that tried to suffocate her, and which had appeared in front of other witnesses. You scared me. I'm alone in the house, by the way.
I couldn't resist. Since I can't sneak up behind you and go, rah, I had to do something. Okay, please continue. Sorry.
And the investigators actually witnessed a peculiar dripping substance dripping from the kitchen cabinet.
Ew. Ectoplasm.
Ectoplasm. Who are you going to call?
Ghostbusters.
The events in the house grew stronger and even followed Jackie from place to place.
Oh no, that's my biggest fear.
Yes, that's what I was afraid of my poltergeist.
Yes.
That's one of the things that really reinforces that some of that activity is caused by the human.
That makes sense. Yes.
Knowing or unknowing.
Mm-hmm.
They began to believe that she was creating the phenomena unconsciously because of her emotional problems.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed that anyone who might be perceived as a threat to her relationship with her boyfriend ended up on the end of a violent attack by the ghosts. However, there are problems with the theory that this was strictly a human agent haunting. The unexplained lights are certainly odd, and so would be the reports of male apparitions from witnesses. And the fact that, as they found out later, Jackie's house continued to be reported as haunted long after she moved out. According to the owners, no subsequent tenants stayed there for longer than 6 months. So could this be merely some leftover after effect from Jackie's presence? Or could something else still be there?
Or both.
Yes. Those are examples of poltergeist activity that can be a combination of place and whatever energy is attached to that place and the human agent. But there's another famous case that appears to be strictly caused by the human agent. I took this information from an article and I love the headline. Rutherglen poltergeist could be caused by, quote, teenage energy, says Scotland's only official demonologist.
Teenage energy. Oh my God.
Teenage energy. I mean, it sounds like, I don't know.
That's more terrifying than like a demonic presence. Teenage energy.
Yeah. It sounds like a really nasty energy drink to me.
Oh yeah, right?
Yeah.
Probably tastes like gasoline or something.
Yeah, or feet.
Or feet. Smelly feet.
That would be teenage boy energy.
Yes, that would definitely be.
This is about an investigator, Jason Love. He's been dealing with paranormal activity for 24 years. He's worked on over 800 cases in United Kingdom, Europe, the United States. The story of the poltergeist attack in South Lanarkshire. Lanarkshire?
Sounds good.
Yeah, good enough. Caught his eye due to the officials involved saying, the testimonies from the police strengthens the case that this was poltergeist activity. So this Jason Love, his day job was a psychiatric nurse. So he knew that many of the incidents could be caused by medications. When he is asked to investigate activity, which he does free of charge, it's one of the first things he asks. The first thing I usually check for is physical or mental activities in the background, to see if there's a history of psychiatry involved. There are quite a lot of medications which can make you hallucinate.
Yes.
This is one of the 3 types of activities that Jason has found, saying, if you have a parent who says they're hearing and seeing things, soon the child will pick up on that and begin to feel these things too. The first thing I do at a property is check if it could be caused by natural reasons first. So the second is a residual energy. This is when visual ghosts actually manifest on the property and are usually connected to the house or the land. It could be that the property was built on an old graveyard, battlefield, even a convent. But the last is human-based, connected to one person and feeding off their energy. In this case, you have to think outside of the box especially if there's a young human involved. That's wrong.
A young human.
Yeah, I know. In this case, sorry. In this case, you have to think outside the box, especially if there's a young person involved. It could be from physical, mental, or sexual abuse, which creates this vortex of negative energy that a poltergeist feeds off. Okay, in case my mom is still listening, can I just say none of those things were an issue? Let's get that on the record. I'm not accusing anybody of anything other than having a moody teenage daughter.
Okay, glad you cleared that up.
Thank you. In fact, Jason said children are the biggest reason for poltergeist activity. One of the most common triggers for this sort of activity is children in their early teens. Manifestation tends to be triggered most by prepubescent teens or teens going through puberty because they are giving off the purest life energy. This is the life force which feeds poltergeists. It's the most typical background as to why this activity exists. It is very rare to come across a case where there aren't children involved. So should you be scared? Jason thinks probably not. It's more common than you would think. I'm contacted on an almost weekly basis. Sometimes people will contact me and they decide they can just live with it or it dies off. Most cases are not really severe. It's really rare to get anything violent. Now, Kim, I don't know about you, but rare isn't comforting enough for me. But I can say that in my particular case, that was the only experience that I've ever had. Whatever the cause was, apparently that energy dissipated at that time, and we never had another recurrence. But I have to say that I generally take all things with a grain of salt until I've experienced them myself. And even at that, all I know is that there was energy and there was an occurrence, and I now feel safe and I don't feel like there's a problem moving forward in the future. So
yeah, I think so. And I think the fact that I never experienced any feeling of weirdness in the house, so it probably was just more that it was just your energy that needed to, it was just working its way through and it processed in that way.
Yeah, you can think of it like when you're shuffling your feet on a cold, dry day and you touch somebody's shoulder and give them a nice zap. So, that energy was discharged. I'm on the fence about ghosts, although I think there can be residual energy, of course, because like you said, energy has to go somewhere. I do believe in an afterlife, but I think that there could be other forms of your human energy that you leave behind beyond your spirit going to whatever it goes to next. So I'm open to it, but in my particular case, I think it was strictly human agent number 00666.
Ew. That might stick with you. I don't know.
It would be.
I can see a t-shirt being made with that on the back.
It's probably one of the nicer nicknames I've accumulated. So.
Yeah, I probably gave you some that were much worse back when we were kids.
So it's like a term of endearment.
There you go.
But Kim, I am emotionally exhausted. Shall we take a break for a quick ad?
Yeah, sounds good. Hey Teresa, I'm loving my Love Goodly subscription box.
Yeah, me too. I'm especially loving that all the products are cruelty-free, toxin-free, eco-friendly, and vegan. Kim, did you know that the average woman uses 168 chemicals in their personal care every day? And up to 60% of what we put on our skin gets absorbed into our bloodstream.
Ew! That makes me even happier to be getting my Love Goodly subscription box. And of course, I love getting a surprise package in the mail every other month.
Yeah, like who doesn't? Every other month, Love Goodly subscribers receive a curated box of 4 to 5 full-size beauty, lifestyle, and wellness products for just $29.95. And since the value of each box is over 2 times the price, you also get great value. And Kim,
Yes.
as if that wasn't awesome enough, our friends at Love Goodly are generously giving our listeners a special offer of 20% off their first subscription box when they use the discount code Curious20. So you go to lovegoodly.com and enter the discount code Curious20, Curious20.
Wow. Curious friends, don't wait. Enroll today to start discovering new faves with socially conscious brands that are better for you and better for the planet. This special offer expires on December 31st and it can't be combined with other offers. So go to lovegoodly.com, that's LOVEGOODLY.com, and enter the discount code Curious20, CURIOUS20.
So, Kim, I've had a minute to collect myself. I want to check in with you. Are you doing okay knowing my haunted history?
Knowing that you're Agent 006?
666.
Or no, 666. Yeah, trying to make it better.
666. Ooh.
Oh. Okay, now you're freaking me
I'm
out.
embracing it.
Let's change the
I'm
subject.
embracing it.
No, no embracing that. We're changing the subject. So I have a little hint about what my Halloween themed topic's gonna be. So here you go.
Oh.
Any guesses?
I do, and I have a trivia fact for you later.
Ooh, okay. So what do you think my topic is?
Okay, so I'm going to guess it's witches or witchcraft.
Okay. Very good. Very good. So in honor of our Halloween special, I'm going to be talking about the Salem witch trials of 1692 and some of the theories as to what could have caused the frenzy of accusations that took place.
Oh, interesting.
So, Teresa, it all started in the bleak winter of 1691. And people of Salem, Massachusetts, they were hunkered down in their cabins. They were just waiting for spring to come because it's a grim time in the winter back in those days. So there's no fresh food or vegetables to eat. They basically had some dried meat and roots to eat, but their mainstay was the coarse bread that they baked from the rye grain they harvested in the fall. So here they were, not great stuff to eat, miserable, cold, yada, yada, yada.
Sounds pleasant.
Lovely. Good times, good times. Well, the Reverend Samuel Parris, he lived in Salem with his wife, his 9-year-old daughter Elizabeth, and 12-year-old niece Abigail Williams, who was orphaned. And during the winter months, there really was little entertainment for poor Elizabeth and Abigail after their chores were done. Therefore, reading was really a popular pastime, not only with kids, but the adults. And that particular winter, all throughout New England, there was an interest in books about prophecy and fortune telling. And these books, of course, were especially interesting and popular among the young girls. You know, it just captured their imagination.
Wow, I would have thought they'd be banned books for them.
I know, especially because they had such Puritan values. But in Essex County, which is the county that Salem's in, girls were forming small informal circles to practice these divinations and fortune-telling techniques that they learned from their reading just to help pass the time. So it just was innocent entertainment, and I guess that's why they got away with it, because it was just all in fun. So Elizabeth Parris and her cousin Abigail Williams and 2 other friends formed such a circle. Tituba, which was Reverend Parris's slave whom he bought while on a trip to Barbados, she would often participate in the circle as well. And she would entertain the girls with stories of witchcraft, demons, and mystic animals. And soon, it was so fascinating, soon other girls heard about it and joined their circle too. And they would spend their evenings listening to Tituba's tales and participate in these fortune-telling experiments. So it is kind of fascinating that they were getting away with this with, the times. But I guess they just looked at it like innocent play.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like nothing ever changes. In our day, it was Ouija board and
Yes.
that light as a feather, stiff as a board.
Right, exactly. And I think even though it was all fun and games at that time and nobody really took it seriously, so they kind of let it go. And these times they would get together, they would also tell their fortunes by dropping an egg white into a glass of water, and then they would interpret the picture it formed, which is so weird. But I guess it was all good fun until Abigail and Elizabeth were said to have begun to become really upset and frightened with the results of these fortunes they were receiving. And shortly before the new year, they began to suffer from violent fits and convulsions. So, this is when the craziness begins. They were having these fits. They began to have incoherent rants. They had hallucinations. They complained of crawly sensations on their skin, and they often retreated into dull eyed trances. Well, desperately, the family turned to the local doctor, who he couldn't find anything wrong with them. So, at his wits' end, he finally decided that there was only one reasonable explanation: witchcraft.
What? One technical, scientific, and medical explanation was witchcraft?
Yes, because obviously it had to be. If he didn't know what was wrong with him, it had to be witchcraft.
That's my go-to
Right?
diagnosis.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I go to the doctor, I get that diagnosis all the time. And I say, well, my sister is Agent 666, so it probably
Double
is.
O, triple
Double O,
six.
triple six. So, of course, the Puritans believed in witches and their ability to harm others. So, of course, they clung to this diagnosis. They defined witchcraft as somebody who enters into a compact with the devil in exchange for certain powers to do evil. So, witchcraft was considered a sin back then because it denied God's superiority, and it was considered a crime because the witch could call up the devil in his or her shape to perform cruel acts against others. So, they thought this was witchcraft, and unknown to Samuel Parris, the father, a woman named Mary Sibley wanted to get to the bottom of this. So, she recommended the making of a witch's cake. Well, I'd never heard of a witch's cake before.
No,
So, what
no.
a witch's cake is, it was believed that a witch's cake had the power to reveal whether witchcraft was afflicting a person with whatever their symptoms were. So, the cake was made with rye flour and the urine of the afflicted person or persons. Yum!
Oh.
May I have some more, please?
Um,
But the cake was then fed to a poor little doggy, and I knew you
no,
wouldn't like that part. Yeah,
no, I
that's
don't like that
cruel.
part.
So if the dog exhibited the same symptoms of what the afflicted persons were exhibiting, then the presence of witchcraft was considered quote unquote proven. Well, why would they feed it?
Again, scientific.
Exactly, so scientific. Why would they feed it to the dog? Well, a dog was believed to be a common familiar associated with the devil. Poor doggies. I
Oh,
know.
I know. Eat your own damn cake, lady.
Eat your own tinkle cake. Um, yes, I agree. Well, so Mary, with her just super smart idea of this witch's cake, she gave the directions to John Indian, who was another of the Paris's family slaves, and she gave him the directions to make the cake. Well, he collected urine from the girls, imagine in like a bedpan or whatever, whatever they used. They didn't have to go out in the freezing cold over the winter to go potty.
Hopefully.
Hopefully that's how he
Yeah.
collected it. And then he had Tituba, who was the female slave, actually bake the witch's cake, and she fed it to the Paris's dog. Well, even though this diagnosis didn't work, Reverend Paris found out about it and he denounced in church the use of this magic. He said it didn't matter if it was done with good intentions, but he called it going to the devil for help against the devil. So he didn't like this whole idea of this divining with a witch's cake to find out if his daughter was possessed by witchcraft.
Interesting. So he was condemning the cake or the
Yes,
use of the cake. And I'm with him on this one. I'm
I am
against the
too.
cake.
I'm on his side on that one, but unfortunately, it didn't extend to the fact that there isn't witchcraft altogether because they kept trying to find out who had afflicted the girls. They really felt like there was somebody who'd put the hex on them, and they kept barraging the girls, and finally, the girls began to name people.
Mm.
So Elizabeth eventually spoke first, and she named poor Tituba as a witch. And then the other girls began to speak as well, and they named Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good as witches. Well, all three of these women were prime candidates for the accusations of witchcraft. Sarah Osborne was an elderly lady who had not gone to church. I know, right? Oh, and she hadn't gone to church in over a year.
A year.
And
Oh my gosh.
yes, poor church attendance was a Puritan sin. Sarah Good was a homeless woman who begged door to door, and if people failed to give her alms, food, whatever, she was known to utter words and leave. Well, residents would often attribute her visits to death of livestock. So they believed the mumbled words she spoke under her breath were curses against them for not showing her charity.
Oh, I'm sure they were. Like
I'm sure they were
our
curses.
kind of curses. Yeah.
Right, but maybe not witchcraft.
Maybe not.
So, since obviously Tituba was Paris's slave and well known to Elizabeth and Abigail, it's no surprise that they named her, and she was named first by Elizabeth.
Well, and she baked pea cake,
She
so
baked, I think I would probably say not nice things, except, of course, they didn't make Elizabeth and Abigail eat the pea cake, so
that's
that was one good thing.
I know, but wouldn't you be offended by the use of your pea in a cake?
Yeah, and if they fed it to my poor doggy, I
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be
No.
happy. Uh, but the negative reputations and low social standing shared by these poor three women clearly made them believable suspects to the Puritans. And word spread like wildfire through the village that witches were hexing the children. And of course, what happens? Soon more victims appeared. Most of them girls under the age of 20. And then of course subsequently arrests began. They began about the end of February and soon the trials followed. Well, two magistrates from Salem town, John Hawthorne, who I found this interesting, was the great-grandfather of famed writer Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Jonathan Corwin, well, they traveled to Salem Village to investigate the cases of witchcraft. Their investigations of Sarah Osborne, Sarah Good, and Tituba were conducted in the Salem Village Meeting House. And during the questioning of the three accused, Elizabeth, Abigail, and six other girls, they would often scream and tumble on the floor of the meeting house, just making a big old show. But it was interesting, even with the harsh questioning and all this hullabaloo by the two magistrates, and all this craziness by the girls, Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, they maintained their innocence. But Tituba, however, confessed for 3 days. So during Tituba's confession, she talked of red rats, talking cats, and a tall man dressed in black. She stated that the man clothed in black made her sign in a book, and that Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and others whose names she could not read had also signed this book. Well, I think it's interesting she can't read names, but she knew that Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne had signed in the book.
Right.
It's a little too convenient. It's really not clear why she confessed to witchcraft. She might have thought that she was guilty because she did practice fortune telling, and perhaps she thought that the judges would be lenient if she confessed. But whatever her reason, a confession was not likely obtained, they say, by torture. I don't know. I'm still kind of suspicious that there might have been some torture involved because they say that physical torture was employed in Europe at the time to elicit confessions from witches or accused witches. There's no confirmed, they say, cases of it being used in colonial America, but like I said, I'm still not convinced on that.
Yeah, and the first or only one, whichever it happens to be, but the first one to confess is a slave. It
Yeah.
kind of makes you wonder what conditions she suffered that might have been different than the two Sarahs.
I totally agree with that. I mean, obviously she was a slave. She was not treated the same way. And I that's exactly what I thought. It makes me very sad to think about that. It makes me sad in general that we had slaves, but that's a whole nother
Mm-hmm.
issue. So when Tituba finished her lengthy confession, she, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne were taken to a Boston jail. And the accusations of witchcraft continued, as I said, against many, many others. And that June, 60-year-old Bridget Bishop was actually the first to be declared guilty of witchcraft, and she was the first to hang. So by September, 140 quote unquote witches had been arrested and 19 had been executed.
Wow.
Yeah, it was more than I had even kind of realized. I knew quite a few had been executed, but I didn't realize how many had been accused.
No, that, and especially in populations so small.
Exactly. Yes. It was a very small community. They say that many of the accused actually barely escaped the gallows by running into the woods and hiding. By September 1692, the hysteria had actually begun to abate. It started to slow down, and public opinion actually turned against the trials. Though the Massachusetts General Court actually later annulled those guilty verdicts against the accused quote unquote witches.
Sorry, because that's a little late for those that hung.
Oh, yeah, I know. Thank you. 19 people are already killed.
Hmm.
It's terrible. But, oh, we're sorry. Here's a little money, and we're gonna say you're not guilty. That doesn't really make up for it. And obviously, the bitterness lingered in the community. I can't imagine why.
Get
Um,
over it.
yeah, get over it. It's done. And obviously, the painful legacy of these Salem witch trials, it endured for centuries. So, what made these lovely Puritans turn on each other with such destructive frenzy? That's what I want to know.
Could it be
Satan?
Satan?
Could be. That's one theory, but I think that's what got them into the mess in the first place. Over the centuries, actually, several theories and factors have been put forth. Some people believe it was caused because of the Puritans' fanatical belief in the supernatural, specifically the devil's practice of giving witches the power to harm others. Others put forth that because the rural Puritan community of Salem Village was dealing with the after effects of a British war with France in the American colonies, that this might have had something to do with it. And others think that a recent smallpox epidemic, fears of attacks from neighboring Native American tribes, and a long-standing rivalry with the more affluent community of Salem town, that these tensions created the perfect atmosphere for the Salem witch trials. So they just had a lot of stuff that they were dealing with, a lot of stressors, and they think that that had something to do with it.
Yeah, it sounds like they had a lot of stress to deal with from outside sources that they didn't necessarily have power over. So they were powerless.
Right.
Sometimes you turn against yourself.
Right. They had no control over a lot of these things. And they were actually, it created a lot of suspicion and resentment towards their neighbors and a big fear of outsiders. So anybody who seemed different was a threat to them. So it's even been put forth that the accusations were fabricated as an excuse for a land grab because the farms and homes of all the victims and many of the accused were confiscated and redistributed to other members of the community. So it was convenient to accuse someone of witchcraft because you could grab their land.
Even if it didn't start that way, once people saw that those were the results, it could continue because of that.
I believe all of these could be and probably were contributing factors for the hysteria that occurred in Salem, but I also agree with many academics that these factors alone just don't seem to explain the frenzied witch hunt the community experienced. Like, I definitely see these factors playing into it, but I feel like something was missing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the early 1970s, a college student in California put forth a new theory that seems to put it all together, seems to have the missing link, so to say. Linda Caporael, a psychology major at UC Santa Barbara, was told to choose a subject for a term paper in her American history course. And having just seen a production of Arthur Miller's play The Crucible, a fictional account of the Salem witch trials, she decided to write about the witch hunt. And she says, as I began researching, she later recalled, I had one of those aha moments. The author of one of her sources said he remained at a loss to explain the hallucinations of the villagers of Salem. She says, it was the word hallucinations that made everything click. Years before, she'd read of a case of ergot poisoning in 1951 in Pont Saint-Esprit, France, where the victim had suffered from hallucinations, and she thought there just might be a connection. So, ergot is a fungus that infects rye, a grain more commonly used, obviously, in past centuries to bake bread than it is today. And one of the byproducts present in ergot-infected grain is ergotamine, which is related to LSD. Toxicologists have known for years that eating bread baked with ergot-contaminated rye can trigger convulsions, delusions, creepy crawly sensations on the skin, vomiting, and hallucinations. And historians were already aware that the illness caused by ergot poisoning, known as St. Anthony's fire, was behind several incidents of mass insanity in medieval Europe.
I've actually heard about that in history class.
Yes.
And it was basically formed a natural hallucinogen.
Exactly.
And they had crusty food to eat.
They only had a lot of their rye bread and some dried meat. So Caporael wondered if the same conditions might have been present in Salem. They were.
They were. How does she know that?
Well, ergot needs warm, damp weather to grow, and those conditions were rife in the fields around Salem in 1691.
Wow.
Rye was the primary grain grown, as we talked about. They had rye bread, and even the witch's cake was made out of rye. So there was plenty of rye to be infected. Caporael also discovered that most of the accusers lived on the west side of the village, where the fields were chronically marshy, making them a perfect breeding ground for the fungus. The crop harvested in the fall of 1691 would have been baked and eaten that winter, which was when the fits of madness began. However, the next summer was unusually dry, which could explain the sudden drop in the bewitchment. No ergot, no madness.
No madness.
No madness.
Those witches' cakes had another secret magic ingredient besides potential witch pee.
Exactly.
Wow.
They had more cray-cray. They were cray-cray cakes.
They had cray-cray sandwiches every day and didn't know it.
They did.
Oh.
They did, bless their hearts. So Caporael continued to research her theory as she pursued her PhD, publishing her findings in 1976 in the journal Science, which brought her support from the scientific community and attention from the news media. Caporael had been careful to say that her theory only accounts for the initial cause of the Salem witch hunts. As the frenzy grew in scope and consequence, she's convinced that the actual sequence of events probably included not only real moments of mass hysteria, but also some overacting on the part of the accusers. Motivated as much by fear of being accused themselves as by an actual malice toward the accused. Caporael's theory remains one of the most convincing explanations for what started the madness that tore apart the village of Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. I believe this is true. I really buy into this theory. I like the science. It makes sense.
Yes.
It's kind of like the missing piece for me that really I can understand how this happened now. You know, there was this outside thing that sparked it, and then our human nature took hold, our greed, our wariness of strangers, anybody who's different, and all those other factors came into play. And it just became a horrible quagmire of witch accusations.
Kim, this is a piece of history that should become a parable. This is the ideal story of how things are not necessarily what they appear, and don't always base your actions without, or maybe your reactions without knowing completely what the story is. Wow.
How our fears take over and we don't react with logic.
Yeah.
You know, they just were, it was all emotion and fantasy, and they just weren't, I just don't feel like they were thinking things through until the madness kind of subsided. It was like the ebb, and then they were able to come to their senses and go, what the heck are we doing? Yeah, it's just fascinating to me. And I really was fascinated to learn about the ergot poisoning.
Yes.
That just really, because as a kid, I always grew up hearing about all the other factors, just the kind of hysteria. I always heard of like their superstitions and their being afraid of witchcraft and all of that, and just their hyper sense of fear surrounding that whole subject. But this just makes it make sense for me. So that's what I was just totally curious about for Halloween this year.
Kim, I mentioned that I was going to give a piece of trivia on your episode or your subject, and I hate to do it, but since I mentioned it,
do it.
One of my favorite podcasts, shout out, is Stuff You Should Know with Chuck and Josh. And the episode I listened to last night, they were talking about a piece of trivia on witches. And do you know, Kim, and this is a vetted piece of information, it's supposedly the truth, why witches are associated with brooms?
Oh, I think I might have heard something, but I don't know if it's the same thing you're thinking of.
Is it disgusting-ish?
Yes.
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 So I'll let you tell
Okay.
it. I'm going to pretend like I don't know because I don't want to tell it.
Yeah. Okay, so apparently witches, or people that were thought to be witches, who may have just been people that were well versed in holistic cures and using herbs and different things made out of nature, they had concocted something, some kind of potion, I'll say, but not in a witchy way, in a healthful way, that had to be absorbed by internal membranes, so like inside your mouth or inside your vagina. And
Ew.
I'm sorry, was this where you were hearing?
Yes,
Yeah.
but you said the V word. Ew.
Sorry, vajayjay.
Ew.
By the way, people, that stuff's
You know I'm
inside.
prude.
I hate it when people say that word for the outside. Anyway, that's my personal rant. They would apply some, maybe one, I don't know, applied this potion, this mixture, this herbal concoction to the wood of a broomstick and use that to apply internally this concoction so that it could be absorbed. And apparently somebody or more than one was caught in the act of application with a broom.
Oh.
That's how it started. So they weren't flying with it. That came much later when they became associated with their brooms. And then over the years, just the folklore added, oh, they mount them and fly.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to look at like pictures of witches on their brooms the same way anymore, isn't it?
I wish I hadn't gone there.
I wish you hadn't gone there either.
I'm wondering if I didn't go there. You decide. People, if you hear this, Kim decided to leave it in. If you didn't hear it, then I don't know what you're talking about.
Hey, I am not going to censure this podcast, so, I may be kind of, funny about things, but I'm going to let you do your thing, girlfriend.
There you go. Well, it wasn't me doing my thing. It was them doing their thing.
Well, hey, and I don't judge, everybody needs to do what they got to do, but I personally don't want to practice that particular form of application.
Yeah.
Let's just leave it there.
I'm not at all curious about that.
I'm not either. I'm not curious about that.
No.
Yeah, yeah. But I did have fun with the whole Halloween episode, and I just totally love this holiday. So,
Yes, our family has a strong love of Halloween. I think it came from our
yeah.
parents' whimsy and our own. So, yeah, it was fun. And I hope that they learn something, and I hope that they can erase from their minds things that they learned that they wish they hadn't. And you know what else I hope for them, Kim?
I think I
Okay,
might.
what do you think?
I think that they should stay
I think they
curious.
should stay curious.
Curious. Bye.